Alright, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a while since we've done this. More specifically, we have not updated our HSR tier list since version 3.4. Obviously, that's the reason why that's the version where Final released, and we also got the buff to all characters, so it was a pretty impactful version. Since then, we've had version 3.5, bringing alongside Saridra as well as Heistland, which revitalized Dot and then gave both Finon and Anexa a brand new best in slot teammate. We had 3.6 with Evernight, who is a great unit, as well as the free Dunhung PT, and most recently in 3.7 we have Cyrene, who of course did impact most of the Chrysos as in the entire game. So I think this right now is the perfect time to update our tier list. Now, if you're curious what the 3.4 tiers look like, it was like this. Definitely some stuff I want to change around considering new additions. We need to put in Heistlands as well as Evernight. We don't have Dot in the previous list, but I think now that Heistlands is released, we might as well consider Dot as a DPS archetype now, so we will be including that now, and then we also need to place Evernight as well. Now, one thing that is key to keep in mind is that this is a purely E0S0 tier list. Teammates considered in teams will only be E0S0 if they're limited 5 stars. We can give some standard light cons, standard 5-star light cons, but no limited light cons, no limited eidolons whatsoever. We're going to be evaluating mostly how strong they are at E0S0, but we will slightly be factoring in as well how free-to-play friendly their team building is. The reality is that most units in the game, even they definitely have a best in slot team, which benefits greatly from at least one unit, and if they don't have that one unit, then their performance will fall off a bit, but not so drastically that they deserve to go down a tier. In almost every case, we'll see if there's any examples of that. So yeah, basically that's the criteria, so I think we just have to hop straight into it. But real quick, if you want to pull any units in version 3.7 or beyond, then I have the perfect thing for you, and that's today's sponsor, lootbar.gg. You can use lootbar to top up on your favorite games like Honkai Star Rail or Genshin Impact and save up to 25%, along with great value offers like the all-in-one bundle, guaranteed limited and rerun character bundles, and the limited 6,480 Oniric shards pack that lasts for the first week of the brand new version. If I were to buy the 3,280 Oniric shards and get double with the top up bonus, all I have to do is enter in my UID, region, and go to top up now, and they typically arrive in less than a minute. Creators like DuckTV and Jello Impact are also collaborating with Lootbar, so they are trustworthy, and they also have thousands of positive reviews on Trustpilot. Also, new users can get 10% off, and returning users can get up to 8% off in the first week of the new version. So be sure to check out Lootbar with the link in the description. Back to the video. Alright, well then, I think we might as well just go ahead and get the tier list started now. There are some placings which basically will not change from the last time. Yanqing, literally no changes whatsoever. He is just going to stay in the F tier. Then I've also got Dr. Ratio as well as Zila in the E tier as well. Not much has changed for them either. Obviously, you can get Zila constellations or eidolons or whatever, but I don't think that really changes much for her. Dr. Ratio is still, his kit just isn't very coherent nowadays, unfortunately. Then going up into the D tier, I'm just going to go ahead and slot in Argenti, Dill, Clara, as well as Himiko. Himiko used to be an absolute queen in Pure Fiction, but unfortunately, HP pulls have gone up, especially since the change to Pure Fiction, and I believe it was version 2.7. So yeah, she's just kind of been struggling a lot more. Minions have much higher HP now, so even if you can weakness break them, she's probably not going to be wiping them out. Clara was a very decent physical damaging unit for free-to-plays, especially early on, but nowadays we have Yunli, we have Finon especially. Yunli has fallen off. We got Yunli and Butil in version 2, but then Finon in version 3 is just the physical units the physical unit to end all physical units. So unfortunately, she doesn't really have a place. Dunhung, Dilrover, imaginary. There's quite a few imaginary DPSs in the game. Rapper was definitely a upgrade to Dill for her time, although she's also fallen off a bit along with Super Rake. But Mighty, I think, is just a much better unit than Dill. I feel like his team building is actually easier than Dill's because, I guess you could use Sunday and then use a -1 speed setup using the basic attack first instead of using Sparkle. But I definitely do feel like Dill kind of belongs in the D tier right now. Just use the preservation form if you like Dunhung. Argenti can see some use sometimes in some physical AoE situations. Finon actually isn't the best in AoE, so if you want a physical attacker in AoE, I guess you could use Argenti. He's definitely usable, especially if your supports are very invested, but assuming all your teammates are E0S0, Argenti just will not be getting a lot of mileage. Next up in the C tier, we have the man who will never not stop getting buffed. This guy feels like he gets a buff almost every single version. Sunday, of course, was very, very nice for him. He is solid, decent Electro DPS as well. The last huge Electro DPS we had was Acheron, and Acheron herself has fallen off a bit. So, Jingyuan, he can have some purpose sometimes. Next up, previously we had Yunli a bit higher up, but I think right now we're gonna go ahead and put her in the C tier. The endgame content just doesn't really favor her. Like I said, we also have a brand new physical DPS who is just objectively better. So, you know, if you want to pull a physical DPS, you've just started out Honkai style, definitely pull Final instead of Yunli. I'm sorry, Yunli fans. She's definitely far from her prime. You know, in her prime, I think she was more of a top 5 DPS than a top 3 DPS. But nowadays she's definitely fallen far from the top 5. So I think C tier will have to be. And honestly, I used to have some of the Super Break characters up in the B tier by the time I was 3.4, but we're in 3.7 now. Let's be so real with ourselves. Super Break, unfortunately, has just fallen off way too much. I'm gonna go ahead and put all of them in the C tier. Realistically, Butil's probably the worst of the lot, which pains me to say because I absolutely love Butil's gameplay as well as just his character. But I'm just gonna go ahead and put all of them in the C tier together. I'm just gonna call Super Break a C tier archetype. Similar how we'll be considering Dot as an entire archetype. I'm just gonna consider Super Break as an entire archetype until they get buffs where at least one of them is worth pulling. You know, if we get a Super Break, a brand new Super Break unit who replaces someone like, for example, Ruan Mei, and she is more beneficial to someone like Firefly, then Firefly is gonna go up, and then Butil might go down, might stay where he is, depending. You know, we'll have to see how good a theoretical Super Break upgrade would be for these 3 units. So yeah, that's gonna round out the C tier. As you can see, I'm kind of just blitzing through stuff right now because, I mean, first of all, we have quite a few DPS characters to rank nowadays in Star Rail. It's not like back in the day where there weren't very many. And then also, I want to save the lengthier discussion for the top tiers because I might have a few hot takes, and I feel like I definitely will need to explain myself a bit more, especially because these characters, like, their position hasn't really changed. You know, like, for example, Cyrene, Evernight, Dunhung Preservation, Saridra, Hysolin, she hasn't affected any of these units release other than making them a bit worse, which is why I'm not spending too much time on them. Anyway, moving on to the B tier. I'm gonna put in 2 of the top 3 units. You know, this used to be the big 3 back in version 2, and now they're probably the mid 3, unfortunately speaking. You know, Akron, E0S0, I love Akron so much. She carried my account. It's only because of Akron that I've been able to full clear every single Memory of Chaos since 2.1. She carried me to my first ever play, 6 stars. Unfortunately, it just doesn't really work nowadays now. Both Fei Shao as well as Akron actually did get a buff in Amphoreus, that being Cypher, of course. Although I don't think Cypher is as crazy of a buff for those 2 as some of the other Chrysos releases. For example, I don't think it's as insane as someone like Saridra for Anexa, or someone like Cyrene or Tribi for Castorus or Mighty, etc. So yeah, unfortunately, or actually wait, the best example would be Hyacinth for Castorus as well, or just for HP scalers in general. They are absolutely insane. Next up, I'm actually going to go ahead and put Jade. Jade, I used to consider one of the worst units in the entire game, but now that AoE is a bit more prevalent, now that Pure Fiction is harder, because I used to think that Jade wasn't very good, because Mini Herta as well as Himiko were just so good in Pure Fiction that you really didn't need Jade. Like, she was literally kind of a wasted unit. Although right now, you know, you compare her up with the Herta, and then Pure Fiction is definitely harder than it used to be. So I actually think she is deserving of the B tier. I did not think I would put Jade in the same tier as Fei Shao or Akron back in the day. But, you know, here we are now. So congratulations to Jade. And I think I'm going to round this off with our first of the buffed characters from version 3.4, that being Jingliu. You know, Jingliu definitely has some very, very strong teams. The HP scaling team, especially, you know, with Sunday, Trivi, as well as Hyson, is very, very nice. The problem is, I feel like she doesn't pair as well, for example, as a secondary DPS to Castorus as someone like Blade would. Also, Evernight released, and she is just I'm gonna be so real, she's a much better ice DPS than Jingliu is right now. So yeah, unfortunately, Jingliu, I feel like, you know, considering the fact that there is another HP scaling ice unit which uses the exact same team as her. For example, we have quite a few wind DPSs when it comes to Blade, Saber, as well as Anexa. There is some overlap between their teams, but their teams don't entirely overlap, whereas Jingliu and Evernight's teams basically entirely overlap, other than the fact that you can now use Cyrene for Evernight, which is just basically an upgrade to all the Jingliu teams. And also considering the fact that Jingliu really, really, really likes an S1 Hyson. You definitely don't need S1 Hyson, but the quality of life definitely is just better if you do have an S1 Hyson. So I feel like she just about misses out on the B tier for me, but hey, I consider Jingliu to be a better unit than Akron and Fei Shao, which who would have thought back in the day. Now, next up, we have the A, S, and double S tiers. Honestly, I might do something a bit strange here. I'm going to go ahead and start off with 2 units in the double S tiers, that being Castris as well as Final, because I feel like these 2 characters are indisputable. And then I feel like some of these characters, actually let's also move up Hysolins as well as Evernight here. I feel like a lot of these characters, you can kind of argue their placement within these 3 tiers. Castris to me is the best DPS in the game right now. That shouldn't really be a controversial statement considering the fact that she has gotten so much love since her release. You know, Tribi released in 3.1, Castris released in 3.2, Hyson released in 3.3. She didn't get anything in 3.4, oh my god, first time ever. But then 3.5, actually no wait, sorry, she didn't get anything in 3.5 either. Oh my god, 2 versions without Castris getting an upgrade. But then in 3.6 she gets Evernight, in 3.7 she gets Cyrene. She just has so many team options. RMC also gets a buff, so she actually just has so many team options. Now I know some people are gonna go ahead and say, oh, but you need you know, someone like Hyacinth to make Castris work. First of all, Castris is so strong, she has so many good teammates now that you don't really need Hyacinth. Hyacinth is a very big upgrade. She can sometimes make you clear up to 2 cycles faster, which is crazy considering the fact that every single cycle matters. The reality is, however, you know, yes, Hyacinth's very strong, but also Hyacinth isn't a niche support. When you think about free-to-play friendly units, you want to kind of punish characters who have niche supports. For example, someone like Saridra is much more niche than someone like Hyacinth. Why is Hyacinth not niche? You know, you might say, oh, she's only for HP scalers. No, she's a sustain, and she is the best unit in the game at sustaining. Her sustain is absolutely crazy. First of all, she increases your max HP, which means that you won't get one-shot randomly. Second of all, it just means you have a higher HP pool, so it takes longer for you to die. Third of all, her healing is just very strong. She can be, you know, she can eat up a lot of SP, although if you don't need to charge new, but you don't need to use your skill every single turn on Hyacinth. If you play a bit smart as well in using her ultimate on her turn, that basically gives you an ult extension, which increases your healing duration, which makes sustaining even easier on Hyacinth. So even if you're looking at casters without Hyacinth, I'd say it's probably an SS tier unit. If you're looking at casters without Cyrene, you know, you can just play Tribi RMC, you can play Tribi Evernight. If you're looking at her without Evernight and without Cyrene, you can still run Tribi RMC. It's just an insane combo. So yeah, Castris, she has gotten so much love that I think it's almost impossible for her not to be considered an SS tier unit. I think she is the best DPS character in the game right now. Although, you know, if you want to disagree, fine. Although I don't think you can disagree about her not being an SS tier unit. Next up we have Finon, who definitely, I actually think Finon supports are a bit more niche than Castris's. Of course, he does have the benefit where his best sustain is probably Dunhung Preservation, who is of course free, which is a huge plus for him. Unfortunately, Saridra is what we would consider more of a niche support. The reality is though that you know, you don't really need Saridra for Finon. Cyrene is a decent support for him as well, pretty damn good, although also not necessary. I actually think one of the best setups for him is just Sunday Bronya. Sunday Bronya is very cool, especially if you have EP Bronya, then you can run attack boots on Finon. That also ends up working very well. You can also run Sunday Saridra, Bronya Saridra, Saridra Cyrene is also an option, or Sunday Cyrene. He has quite a few team options. Like I said, you basically need to pull for one niche-ish kind of support, or if not, then you can just use Bronya. So yeah, I think he has a lot of team options. He's just very strong in Memory of Chaos, as well as pretty damn good in Apex Shadow, less so in Pure Fiction. I'd say Castris is probably more all-around than Finon. She's not the best at Apex Shadow, but I think her Apex Shadow performance is better than Finon's Pure Fiction performance. So I'd say overall, Castris is a bit more versatile in all 3 endgame modes, and I also consider her to be a bit stronger. But then again, how can she not be a bit stronger when she has literally been given every single possible buff? Now, next up is a bit of a debate. Normally I want to have 3 units in the SS tier. I could consider having 4. I'm not sure who I want to put in there. So I think we need to tackle the A tier first. And first of all, A tier, Blade. I don't see Blade going any higher than the A tier, but I'm actually going to put Saber here as well. I'm not going to lie, I actually prefer Blade to Saber. The thing is, with him going to standard banner, his E1 is very obtainable, and E1 Blade is actually pretty damn strong, and you can actually make an entire Blade team along with an entire Castris team without their teams overlapping. You can run Castris, Evernight, or RMC, Cyrene, and then Hyacinth, and then for Blade, you can run Sunday, Tribi, as well as Luocha. If you have Blade's E1, then you're looking at an average team, to be honest, and that's pretty damn solid. So, you know, in the past, I was debating whether I should put Saber above Blade, and I ended up doing so because Blade just had too much team overlap with Castris as well. With Castris. But now that his team overlap isn't as bad, I actually think that we can put Saber and Blade kind of in the same tier. I think Saber kind of suffers from not having one defined best install team. Sunday Tribute is always a strong core. Sunday as well as Robin is also going to be strong. Sarija, I think, is an okay option, not the best, but decent. You could also use Bronya as a replacement for her, but I don't think Bronya for Saber is quite as strong as Bronya is for Finon. Danheng Preservation is also pretty damn solid for her, especially if you're pairing her with Sunday. But again, I don't feel like she's that much better than Blade. If you're pairing E0 Blade with Hyacinth, he's very good. If you're playing E1 Blade without Hyacinth, he's also very good. So I feel like Blade is just really easy to vertically invest to, considering the fact that he is on the standard banner now. Oh, sorry, not standard banner, but he is in the 50-50 loss pool. Pick up his E1, big damage upgrade. E2, not a huge damage upgrade, but a damage upgrade nonetheless. Whereas Saber, no dedicated best in slot team. I also feel like I personally say that Blade's probably slightly better in Pure Fiction. Memory of Chaos, maybe similar-ish performance, and then I think Apex Shadow Saber tends to do a bit better because Blade doesn't really get any good buffs in Apex Shadow, to be honest, unless it's something HP scaling related, but then sometimes it's too niche for Blade to even use, so he actually doesn't benefit from the HP design buffs anyway. So yeah, I actually would put both Blade and Saber in the A tier. Unfortunately, neither are the best win DPS in the game. We will be touching on that later on, but I definitely do think A tier is deserving for the both of them. When it comes to another unit in the A tier, this is going to be the first very hot take, I think. It's Herta. And I don't know whether I want to put Herta in the A tier or the S tier. My thinking for A tier is that in Pure Fiction, I honestly find that Alexa gets stronger clears than Herta, which is a bit crazy. Sunday, with a team of Sunday, Saridra, as well as, I believe it was either Linkshot or Danheng Preservation. I actually got a better clear in the most recent Pure Fiction on a side which wasn't Wind Weak, compared to Herta using Mini Herta, Tribi, as well as a Sustain, against Ice Weakness, which is kind of crazy. So this is kind of implying the fact that, and you might be saying, oh, you're using Mini Herta, that's why her performance was worse. But if I need to use the best Pure Fiction DPS as well as the second best Pure Fiction DPS, that being Jade, in order to get a stronger clear than Alexa, who isn't supposed to be a Pure Fiction specialist, then I almost think that warrants the A tier. The only reason I'm gonna put Herta in the S tier instead is because I want to move Archer down into the A tier, because Archer, although he is a very, very strong unit, at his core, he is the first unit I actually do want to punish, kind of, for his free-to-play friendliness. Whereas units like Castris, yes, they fall off without Hyacinth, but they're still very strong. Yes, Finon falls off without Surjo, but he's very strong. Archer, without Sparkle, who is definitely a niche support. There is no other unit in the top 3 tiers who would want to use Sparkle other than Archer, so she is definitely a niche support. His performance is probably the single biggest fall-off. I dare I say, nowadays, Archer without Sparkle feels almost unusable to play if you're a free-to-play. I despise trying out to play Archer without Sparkle, to the point that because I don't have Sparkle on either of my accounts, I just don't use Archer on either of my accounts. You can use Hanya for him. She's okay. It just doesn't end well. No matter what teams I run, I just never ever feel happy running Archer. If you have Sparkle, he's a very strong unit. Without Sparkle, I feel like he is just not the strongest unit. So, although there is an argument for her to being in the A tier, I feel like the argument is bigger for Archer. If this wasn't a free-to-play tier list, I'd actually maybe even consider doing this, but because this is more free-to-play centered, I'm actually going to go ahead and do this. So Herta mains, give me your reasons why you think that Herta belongs in a higher tier. But for the time being, I won't put her in the A tier. We'll see if that changes in the future. But for the time being, she gets to hold on to her S tier. Next up, I want to go ahead and put Mighty as well as Aglaya. They're in a similar boat where they're both pretty strong Chrysos heirs. They also got a decent upgrade from Cyrene. I don't think they're insane. Danheng Preservation is also a nice alternative to Aglaya. Aglaya was maybe at risk of going down because of her reliance on Huohuo, who is definitely more niche than Hyacinth, as well as more niche than Danheng Preservation, because he is, of course, given out for free. So I could have thought of... So for me, it was in between Herta, Archer, as well as Aglaya. on which one should go down into the A tier. I definitely knew I was going to move Saber down, but I wanted to move one more person down because we have so many characters we want to consider, and I kind of don't want to bloat the top tiers. So one had to move down, and of the lot, I did end up picking Archer. If it wasn't for Cyrene as well as Donghang Preservation, it's possible that that could have been Aglaya. Also possible it could have been Mighty as well. Once again, I think that Mighty's biggest benefit from Cyrene is not only that he gets another potential teammate, is that you can now actually run a Mighty team on the first half as well as a Castrus team on the second half without them overlapping teammates. You can now give Cyrene to Castrus as well as Tribi to Mighty, and then he can also take a Sunday as well as a Luocha. Mighty actually isn't as Hyson reliant as someone like Blade or Castrus, so he actually still functions very well without it, and then he also still functions well with someone like Cyrene in place of Tribi as well. So yeah, these characters are just all solid E0S0, and then I need to pick at least 1 or 2 more units to go into the SS tier, and it's between Anexa, Hysolans, and Evernight. And there's a lot to say about these guys. There is definitely a lot to say about these guys. Honestly, this is probably the hardest SS and S tier ranking I have ever had to do. My thinking is that I think Anexa is so good in all 3 endgame modes that he's going to have to go ahead and go in the SS tier. His SS tier performance, I'd say, is maybe a bit Surge reliant, although he can use Cyrene to good effect. Sunday is a no-brainer for him. Sunday is just insane for Anexa. And then it's kind of a toss-up between Surudra, Cyrene, as well as, Robin is also a usable option. Tribi is also a usable option. He just... To unlock his best installed performance, you definitely do want Surudra, in my opinion. Sunday Surudra is my favorite team for Anexa. He also definitely does benefit from Donghang Preservation's release. I think Donghang Preservation's release does elevate him above Herta for me. Also the fact that I think he's more universal in all 3 endgame modes because, Herta benefited a lot from endgame design as well as a lot of it being AoE focused. For example, someone like Nikador, who had a high personal HP bar, if you took out his summons, he would take personal damage, or someone like Flame Reaver, who had the same mechanic. But now there are less bosses with those mechanics and you need to do more damage to them themselves. For example, someone like Lygus, you need to do a lot of single target damage, and killing his minions will not be dealing extra damage to him, so Herta couldn't really benefit from that. Whereas someone like Anexa is very good in single target. He's also good in AoE. Not as strong in AoE as he is in single target, but just because of the way bounce attack works. But I still will definitely put Anexa in the SS tier. Like I said, his third slot in between Surudra, Cyrene, as well as Tribi, as well as Robin. Personally, I do think Surudra is the best one, but all of those will still be competitive enough that I will put him in the SS tier. And the thing really elevating him is the synergy between Donghang Preservation as well as Sunday, making him an even stronger unit. So I will actually be putting Anexa in the SS tier. Like I said, I've even had better performances with him in Pure Friction than I did with Herta, and then I find him to work better in Apex Shadow as well as MOC than Herta after the AoE meta has died down a bit. It's not dead, but it's definitely died down a bit. So yeah, I will be putting Anexa in the SS tier, and now it's in between our 2 newest characters, Hysolans and Evernight, who will be claiming the lost slot in the SS tier, who will be going into the S tier. The thing with Evernight is that she's both a main DPS and not a main DPS. If this was before Cyrene release, I would definitely do this. But after Cyrene release, RMC Cyrene plus Hyson is just such a strong core for Evernight. Also, RMC would be rounding out that team, so that's actually a unit you don't need to pull for because that is just a character you get for free. I think if I'm a brand new Star Rail player, what I would do is I think I would pull for Evernight and Cyrene over Hysolans in the Dot team. I personally predict that Black Swan will get a buff in version 4, and then Dot might end up being better than the Chrysos's S team, but we're not in that timeline yet. We are still in version 3. Evernight can be used as basically Evernight is more flexible than Hysolans. The real kicker for me here is that Evernight can be either a sub DPS or a main DPS. If you're only looking at main DPS, Evernight to Hysolans Dot, it's more competitive. I'd still maybe give Evernight the slight edge because you're only pulling for 2 units, that being Kafka and Black Swan in a Hysolans team as well. But honestly, I'm just a bit more confident in Evernight right now than I am in Hysolans. I think the main reason here is that although the dot team is very, very strong in Memory of Chaos, it's also pretty good in Pure Fiction. I think it definitely falls off in Apex Shadow. It's still good in Apex Shadow. I got a decent clear of it most recently. Although, you know, I feel like Evernight has a bit more upside than the dot team. You know, slap on a team with Cyrene, slap on a team with Hyacinth, slap on a team with, and then with the brand new RMC is just very, very strong. And then if you pair her up with Castris, you have the best team in the entire game, which is why I personally will be putting Evernight in the SS tier and Hyslins in the S tier. I think that in version 4 this definitely could swap around, but then again, we don't know what's going to happen in version 4. We can only rank with what we know is going on right now, which is why my tier list looks the way it does. That's why Super Break is all the way down in the C tier. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. Will someone like Akron and Facial get buffs in version 4? I think it's very likely, but because we don't know what's going to happen in version 4, we have to go with 3.7 performance, and for me, Castris, Phynon, and Nexa are top 3 DPSs in the game. Shove in Evernight as well, because you can run her as a DPS or as a sub DPS. Kind of similar to why I used to rank Anexa in the SS tier as well, but nowadays I honestly feel like Anexa's DPS performance is so much better than the sub DPS performance that I'd mostly consider as main DPS performance. Evernight is currently in the category where both her sub DPS and main DPS performance are very, very viable. Even at E0S0, to me, these are the 4 best DPS units in the entire game. They're followed by D-Slot, then D-Slot, and then, you know, if you're asking me on pulling recommendations, I'd say anyone A tier and above is definitely who you should be going for. But then again, this is just all for a bit of fun. This is just my opinions. This doesn't mean I'm correct, you know. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions. I feel like there are some characters who definitely deserve their placements, like Phynon and Castris in the SS tiers. But then other units, I feel like, you know, there's definitely a bit more debate. But like I said, this is just my opinion. Just all for a bit of fun. So yeah, let me know your guys' thoughts, your guys' placements. What would you guys change? What would you guys keep the same? What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Go ahead and keep it all civil, please. I'm up for a lot of civil discussion. With that being said, I think this is where we will be ending it. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys next time. See ya.